Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Now, if you're like me, you're very anxious to resume the reading and discussion of the book Romanism and the Reformation by H. Grattan Guinness. If you wish to follow along in the book, please use your favorite search engine. Type in the title of this book, Romanism and the Reformation. When the list opens up, scroll down until you find the selection archive.org, University of Toronto, and then click on that link and this book will come up. Then scroll down to where it says full screen, click on full screen to make the book easier to read, and then advance the book to page 54 where we concluded yesterday. Now, with those instructions out of the way, we'll retreat, as is our custom here, for continuity purposes. We will retreat to number 6 of the 8-point dissertation that H. Grattan Guinness is giving us to prove beyond any doubt whatsoever, that the papacy of the Roman Catholic Church is the only candidate for what the Bible describes as the Antichrist, the man of sin and the son of perdition. There is no other candidate possible. God made it so obvious in the world who his counterfeit is, the Antichrist of the Bible, that it is beyond argument. And H. Grattan Guinness has written a book that stands head and shoulders above all others, proving beyond question what has become questionable in the churches today. The historicist view, the view held by all the Protestant reformers and all true Bible Christians prior to the Protestant Reformation, that the papacy fulfilled all of the prophecies regarding Antichrist, is now disbelieved in the churches. So much so that the churches are literally reuniting under the authority of the papacy in a global so-called Christian religion. And not only that, but that all religions are equal pathways to God, and that the head of this new global religion on the earth is the papacy. They are renouncing true Bible Christianity and accepting the last great apostasy. And they are accepting the papacy as the ecclesiastical head of the world. They are making the papacy the very foundation for the New World Order. And it could not have been but for two great pillars of the Roman Catholic Church to destroy Protestantism. Number one, futurism. This idea that replaces the correct view of Bible prophecy, historicism, for a counterfeit that says that Antichrist has not been in the world throughout all history, all of the Christian era, but that he won't arrive on the world scene until just 7 years before Christ returns, during the 7 years of Great Tribulation, during the 70th week of Daniel, as they say. The second great pillar for the destruction of Bible Protestantism is ecumenism. And ecumenism stands on the shoulders of futurism. Now, this author proves all of it. As I said, we'll begin with point 6 of this irrefutable proof that H. Grattan Guinness puts forward, identifying the papacy as that man of sin, the son of perdition, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. Point number 6. Systematic and long-continued persecution of the saints is one of the most marked features of the little horn of the prophecy. It is predicted that he should, quote, wear out the saints of the Most High, unquote. His first great characteristic is blasphemous opposition to God. His next salient feature is oppressive cruelty towards men. And just as Christ allowed his people to suffer 10 persecutions under the pagan emperors of Rome, so he allowed his faithful witnesses to be worn out by the cruelties of papal Rome. Quote, "They shall be given into his hand," unquote. The church has to tread in the footsteps of Christ himself, who resisted unto blood, striving against sin, and was put to death by the power of Rome. She is called to the fellowship of his sufferings, and while they secured the salvation of our race, hers have not been unfaithful, for the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. But we must compare the facts of history with the prediction of prophecy on this point, to see how deeply this mark is engraved on the papacy, as upon no other power that has ever existed on the earth. That the Church of Rome and her papal head have persecuted largely and long, none can pretend to deny. In fact, so far from denying it, Rome glories in it and regards it as one of her great merits. Other nations have now abandoned as unsound, quote, "the bloody tenet of persecution," unquote. Rome retains it still, approves it theoretically, and would carry it out as vigorously as ever practically if she could. Other powers have persecuted to a small extent and occasionally in the past, but never systematically and by law throughout ages. All but Rome now holds religious liberty to be an inherent right of man. Rome has, on the other hand, persecuted on principle and steadily from the 7th century right on to the French Revolution and to some extent almost to the present time. She does so still in the secret recesses of her nunneries and monasteries under the name of penance. Why else does she require shops for the sale of instruments of bodily torture such as exist this day in London? Rome's contention is not that she does not persecute, but only that she does not persecute saints. Now, let me stop and make a comment. Don't forget that in the Roman Catholic Church, one is not a saint until one dies, and then only after the lengthy and complicated process of beatification by the magisterium of the Roman Catholic Church, and only then elevated to sainthood. So it is dubious to say that Rome doesn't persecute the saints, when Rome doesn't believe a saint can be persecuted because saints only exist after death. Now, again, Rome's contention is not that she does not persecute, but only that she does not persecute saints. She punishes heretics, a very different thing. The first would be wicked. The last she esteems as laudable. In the Rhemish New Testament, there is a note on the words, quote, "drunken with the blood of the saints," unquote, which runs as follows, quote, Protestants foolishly expound this of Rome because heretics are there put to death. But their blood is not called the blood of saints any more than the blood of thieves and man-killers or other malefactors. And for the shedding of it, no commonwealth shall give account, unquote. This is clear. Rome approves the murder of heretics and fully admits that she practices her principles. The question, therefore, becomes this. Are those whom Rome calls heretics the same as those whom the prophet Daniel calls saints? If so, the identification of the papacy is as complete in this respect as in all the previous points. In order to arrive at an answer to this question, let us take Rome's own definition of a heretic. The following statements are from authorized documents, laws, and decrees of the papacy, dating from the time of Pope Pelagius in the 6th century, 1,200 years ago. Quote, "Schism is evil. Whoever is separated from the apostolic see is doubtless in schism. Do then what we often exhort. Take pains that they who presume to commit this sin be brought into custody. Do not hesitate to compress men of this kind. And if he despise this, let him be crushed by the public powers." Unquote. This, it will be observed, makes a want of perfect submission to the Pope, even though no false doctrine or evil practice be alleged. A ground for persecution. Pope Damasus, whose election to the pontificate was secured by 137 murders, authorizes persecution of those who speak against any of the holy canons, and adds this, quote, "It is permitted neither to think nor to speak differently from the Roman Church." Unquote. This is one of the canons which it is blasphemy to violate. And he who ventures to differ, even in thought, on any point whatever from the Roman Church, is therefore a heretic. Hundreds of decisions on detailed examples of heresy are all summed up in this one. The Roman decrees everywhere supply similar definitions. Whatever is short of absolute, unconditional surrender of all freedom of act, word, or even thought and conscience is heresy. Every evangelical Christian in this world is therefore, according to Romanist canons, a heretic, and as such, liable to quote-unquote punishment. And moreover, Rome frankly admits that it is only where she cannot, in the nature of things, carry out her ecclesiastical discipline that she is justified in refraining from persecution. The papacy teaches all her adherents that it is a sacred duty to exterminate heresy. From age to age, it has sought to crush out all opposition to its own dogmas and corruptions. And papal edicts for persecution are innumerable. The Fourth Lateran Council issued a canon on the subject, which subsequently became an awful instrument of cruelty. For long ages, it was held and taught universally within the Roman Catholic Church that whoever fell fighting against a heretic had merited heaven. Now let me stop and comment. It's the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church that if any Roman Catholic dies, in this case falls, fighting against a heretic, he has merited heaven. In other words, he can advance to the gate of heaven and instruct St. Peter, as they say, to step aside and allow entry into the kingdom of heaven because I have fallen in the fight against heretics, which are nonetheless true Bible-believing Protestants, saints according to the Bible. This is the teaching, the official teaching, the long-standing teaching, ever since at least the Fourth Lateran Council of the Roman Catholic Church. Any Roman Catholic who dies in a crusade, who dies in an inquisition, who dies fighting heretics, has merited heaven. He can say, I belong here because I've earned my right to be here by falling in death fighting heretics. Continuing now, he says, Urban II, against a decree, acted on a lass. He says, to this day in Ireland, that the murder of heretics was excusable. Quote, we do not count them murderers who, burning with the zeal of their Catholic mother against the excommunicate, in other words, those who have been excommunicated, may happen to have slain some of them, unquote. Let me read it again. Quote, we do not count them murderers who, burning with the zeal of their Catholic mother against the excommunicate, may happen to have slain some of them, unquote. If not absolutely murdered, heretics might be ill-treated ad libitum. In other words, if it is inconvenient in certain circumstances to kill a heretic, then you may mistreat them by any means. Let me read it again. If not absolutely murdered, heretics might be ill-treated ad libitum, according to an ordinance of Pope Gregory IX, who writes to the Archbishop of Milan, quote, let those understand themselves to be absolved the debt of fidelity, homage, and all manner of service, who were bound by any compact, however firmly ratified, to those who have fallen into heresy, unquote. In other words, if a Roman Catholic is bound by any oath or obligation or contract to a Bible-believing Christian, he is altogether exonerated from that oath or released from the contract. It's null and void on its face. Now, how many Bible-believing Christians throughout history have been cheated of what really truly belongs to them through contractual agreements with Roman Catholics? This is exactly why God said, be ye not unequally yoked with unbelievers. Okay, this is proof. This quote from Pope Gregory IX, one of the most persecuting of all the popes of history, releasing any Roman Catholic from any homage, any fidelity, from any manner of service, no matter if bound by contract to a heretic, to a Protestant. God well warned his people not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers, with Roman Catholics, because their word is not worth the air it took to breathe it. When the Pope can absolve any and every Roman Catholic from any oath of fealty, any contract, we are indeed unequally yoked when we agree to join ourselves with Roman Catholics. Now he continues, systematic persecution and extermination of heretics among their subjects was constantly enjoined. In other words, forced upon the kings and the emperors. Such were required solemnly to swear on their coronation that they would, according to their power, faithfully render their service to the Pope. If they neglected to do it, the sovereign pontiff would declare the vassals free and give their realms to rigid papists who would more effectively persecute. Now, if you're a regular listener to Inquisition Update, you know through the reading of the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson, there were innumerable examples of when the papacy falling out, one of the kings of Europe falling out of favor with the papacy, whether he embraced a heresy or literally just fell into a personal disagreement with the Pope, the Pope in retaliation would simply release all the subjects of his realm from obedience to him. In other words, overthrowing the kingdom and inciting civil wars and genocide and regicide within the country. If they, that is the kings of the earth, neglected to do it, in other words, to obey the Pope, the sovereign pontiff would declare the vassals free and give their realms to the rigid papists who would more effectually persecute. So if a king like Queen Mary or Queen Elizabeth of England refused to persecute Protestants, then the Pope issued his thunders of anathema against her, excommunicated her, and released all of her subjects from obedience to her, and then led the Spanish Armada to take over the country for the Pope and to install a papal monarchy as head of the government in England. He continues, he says, if monarchs became heretics themselves, they were to be deposed and anathematized. Thus, Pius V, quote, issued a bull for the damnation and excommunication of Queen Elizabeth and her adherents, unquote, cutting her off from, quote, the unity of the body of Christ, unquote, depriving her of her crown and kingdom, and pronouncing a curse on her and all those who continue to obey her. The laws of the papacy on this subject increase in malignity from the beginning down to the modern times. Bellarmine argues, and this is Robert Bellarmine, one of the most famous cardinals of the Roman Catholic Church, an oath-spitting Jesuit. He says, Bellarmine argues for the necessity of burning heretics, a practice which Luther had asserted to be contrary to the Spirit of God. He says, quote, experience teaches that there is no other remedy, for the Church has proceeded by slow steps and tried all remedies. First, she only excommunicated. Then she added a fine of money, and afterwards exile. Lastly, she was compelled to come to the punishment of death. For heretics despise excommunication, and say that those lightnings are cold. If you threaten a fine of money, they neither fear God nor regard men, knowing that fools will not be wanting to believe in them, and by whom they may be sustained. If you shut them in prison or send them into exile, they corrupt those nearer to them with their words and with their and those at a distance with their books. Therefore, the only remedy is to send them betimes into their own place, unquote. That means to the grave. This is the justification that Rome still adheres to today for the persecution of the saints. So much so that she is drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. We'll return to the book Romanism and the Reformation after the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Have you read the last prophecy? The book of Revelation. Who can understand it? We believe that God wrote His Word to us for our understanding and salvation, on which so many diverse Christians believe in the same fundamental principles. But not so the prophecy of Daniel and Revelation. Has God, by His Holy Spirit, given a sure interpretation to these mysterious passages through the centuries? Yes, He has. The only difference to the individual is on which side of each prophecy he stands in time, before or after, past or future. The last prophecy is as much a book of history, fulfilling prophecy, exposed in such a way as to leave you without a doubt. Because we are living near the end of this era, we should be able to understand the substantial amount of the revelation which has already come to pass. Get the book, The Last Prophecy, which is an abridgment of E.B. Elliott's Jorge Apocalypticae, the most comprehensive work ever done on the Revelation, condensed down to a mere 258 pages. You will come away with numerous, incontrovertible revelations into the book of Revelation, to easily dispel all of the futurist confusion which has become so popular over the last century. Visit the shopping page at FirstAmendmentRadio.com to get your copy. Get 20% off when you buy it at the FirstAmendmentRadio.com shop.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. We'll return immediately to the book. All of Rome's maxims, all of her utterances, official and private, demand the persecution, the extirpation, and the annihilation of all heretics, the saints of Almighty God. Quote, under these bloody maxims, those persecutions were carried on from the 7th and 12th centuries, from the 11th and 12th centuries, almost to the present day, which stand out in the pages of history. After a signal of open martyrdom had been given in the cannons of Orleans, there followed the extirpation of the Albigensians under the form of a crusade, the establishment of the Inquisition, the cruel attempts to extinguish the Waldenses, the martyrdom of the Lollards, the cruel wars to exterminate the Bohemians, the burning of John Huss and Jerome, and multitudes of other confessors before the Reformation, and afterwards the ferocious cruelties practiced in the Netherlands, the martyrdoms of Queen Mary's reign, the extinction by fire and sword of the Reformation in Spain and Italy, by fraud and open persecution in Poland, the massacre of Bartholomew, the persecutions of the Huguenots by the League, the extirpation of the Vaudois, and all the cruelties and perjuries connected with the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. These are the more open and conspicuous facts which explain the prophecy, besides the slow and secret murders of the holy tribunal of the Inquisition. A Romanist writer, remember this is a Roman Catholic now, not a heretic, according to the Roman Catholic Church, one of Rome's own, a Romanist writer who deplored the persecuting policy of his church, Professor Rossetti, writes, quote, it makes the heart of the true Christian bleed to think of this fatal error of the Latin Church, which by persecuting others laid the foundation of her own irreparable ruin. That the opinions held by these so-called heretics were most injurious to the Church of Rome cannot be denied, but the means taken to destroy them were, of all others, the most likely to strengthen them, to render them more deeply rooted. The prophet John or rather the prophet Daniel and St. John the Revelator foretold that Satan's delegate would use horrid cruelties and inundate Babylon with the blood of Christ's martyrs. And the Pope, to prove that he was not that delegate, did use horrible cruelties and caused Rome to overflow with the purest of Christian blood. Unquote. Remember, that was a Roman Catholic writer. Not a Protestant, not a heretic, but a Roman Catholic. He continues, he says, so Sismondi, the historian, writes, quote, to maintain unity of belief, the Church had recourse to the expedient of burning all those who separated themselves from her. But although for 200 years the fires were never quenched, still every day saw Romanists abjuring the faith of their fathers and embracing the religion which often guided them to the stake. Unquote. Yes, the persecution of the saint by the Roman Catholic Church was the very thing that led Roman Catholics out of the church to embrace Protestantism and to join them at the stake, to be burned. He continues. He says, in vain, Gregory IX, in A.D. 1231, put to death every heretic whom he found concealed in Rome. His own letters show that the heretics only increased in numbers. Unquote. I'm going to comment here. This Gregory IX, one of the most bloody persecutors of the saints of God in Roman Catholic history, one of the most lauded popes in the list of popery, you will be stunned to realize has been publicly acknowledged by a bronze bust of his diabolical face being proudly displayed in the Congress of the United States. Pope Gregory IX, this most great persecutor of Protestants, is given a place of veneration in the Congress of the United States. And he is championed as being one of the icons of law and jurisprudence. To be lauded as an example, an icon for the lawmakers of this country, in the very seat of our House of Legislation in this once Protestant land. His bust is proudly displayed in the Congress of the United States. And if there were a breath, even a breath of Protestantism left in this country, that bust would be taken down publicly with all the television cameras rolling on it, taken into the streets, and utterly annihilated by fire. There's not a breath of Protestantism left in this country. For the most powerful legislative body in this country to venerate this Antichrist, this persecutor of God's saints, Antichrist Gregory IX, is inexcusable and should not be tolerated in any Protestant land, much less the United States of America. Pope Gregory IX was not a lawgiver. He was an antichrist. He was in rebellion against the Most High. He repudiated God's law. He replaced God's law with his own. And we use that as an example in the highest legislative body in this country. It's a ghastly reality. Now the author continues, it must never be forgotten that all Rome's ordinances against heresy, all its statutes of persecution, remain in its canon law, unabrogated, unchanged. And as the papacy is infallible in its own esteem, unchangeable, irreformable, its present disuse of persecution practically is the result of the heavy judgments which have since the Reformation, and especially since the French Revolution, overtaken it. The author is plainly telling you the only reason that Rome is not currently persecuting as she has always done is simply because of the Protestant Reformation. He continues, he said, it has now no army and no inquisition of its own, nor is any single kingdom in Europe willing to any longer act as its executioner. Rome lacks the power. It utterly lacks the power to persecute directly or indirectly. It can only stir up sedition and revolt in Protestant countries, and thus endeavor to injure and weaken Protestant powers, as it is doing today in Ireland and in the United States. And let me reiterate what I said at the beginning of the broadcast. Rome's endeavor to stir up sedition and revolt in this Protestant country is founded upon two pillars, neither of which were even known in the world prior to the end of the 19th century, the late 1800s. Futurism and ecumenism. Futurism is the belief that the papacy is not the Antichrist of the Bible, but that Antichrist is a single individual that arises on the world scene just 7 years before Christ returned. And that because Protestants have now believed this to be the Orthodox teaching, they no longer believe that the papacy is the Antichrist. They've renounced their historicism. And they now believe in a future Antichrist. And they have therefore exonerated the papacy and thrown out the beliefs of all the Protestant reformers, every single one of them, and every martyr that preceded them. They have thrown out that belief. And now, because they no longer see in the papacy the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, they now see him not as Antichrist, but as Christ's vicar on earth. And they seek to ecumenically reunite with him, thus repudiating the gospel altogether and becoming a servant and a subject of Antichrist. We cannot serve two masters in this country. If there's any hope for the United States of America as a Protestant nation, if there's any hope for the spreading of the gospel in this country or anywhere else in the world through American and United States missionaries, it is the refutation, the repudiation of futurism and ecumenism, the one standing upon the shoulders of the other. And none of it could have happened. Not a thing of it could have happened but for the forgetfulness of Protestants and what Protestantism truly represents, and all the blood of her martyrs. He says Rome is too weak politically to defy modern society by reintroducing medieval tortures, massacres, religious crusades, and auto-da-fés. But it is willing as ever. The Roman Catholic Church is as willing as ever and awaits the opportunity only. As a drunkard may retain his vicious appetite when he has no longer the means to gratify it, so Rome, long drunken with the blood of the saints, is restrained from further maddening and debasing draughts of her dreadful beverage by nothing but inability to procure them. Well, let me ask my listeners the question, what will happen to Rome's ability to persecute when this country, lock, stock, and barrel, reunites with the papacy under the ecumenical movement, believing in the phony Jesuit futurist facade? Open religious persecution once again of God's holy people. She will drink deeply of her cup of abominations and the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus, because now there is no restraint. There is no Protestantism left in this country to keep her from getting once again drunk with the blood of the saints. You realize that this author, this Protestant preacher, called of God to warn Protestants of futurism, this message is the most important information available today. It is of the greatest consequence. You can talk about global warming, you can talk about disease, you can talk about health care, you can talk about the wars, you can talk about the corruption in government, the corruption in banking, you can talk about HAARP, you can talk about chemtrails, you can talk about bioengineered food, you can talk about all of it, and you'll never scratch the surface of the importance that we are presenting here today on Inquisition Update. You can forget all of those other discussions, and you can warn God's people. Remind them of their Protestant heritage and what the papacy and the Roman Catholic Church represents in history and in the world. And all these other things will be ended. Don't waste another day. Don't waste another email. Don't forward another link to an internet connection or a video that has nothing to do with futurism and ecumenism and Protestantism, the return to the belief, the correct, the historical, the prophetic belief that the Antichrist of Rome, the papacy, fulfills all the Bible prophecies regarding Antichrist, the man of sin, the son of perdition. Your best efforts would be spent restoring Protestantism to this country. Because if Protestantism is restored, all of Rome's pretensions are exposed. And all of her diabolical workings in the world, including our government, including all those other things that I mentioned, are exposed. The author continues, he says, the papacy, by justifying as righteous all the horrible persecutions of the past, attests her readiness to renew them whenever the opportunity may serve. Ladies and gentlemen, post-Vatican Council II and the union of the Protestant churches back under the authority of the papacy has presented that opportunity for the horrible persecutions of the past, and has revived Rome's readiness to renew her drunkenness on the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. Vatican Council II's ecumenism, which could not be possible were it not for the belief in futurism, has literally opened the doors for Rome to do anything she wants to do in this country. He continues, he says, as I shall have to recur to this subject when treating of St. John's review of a foreview of Romanism. I will add nothing further on this point. I've said enough to show that this sixth mark of the little horn attaches most distinctly to the papacy and indicates it alone among all the powers that have ever held sway on the Roman earth. It has martyred by millions the saints of God, the best and holiest men. Its persecuting edicts range over the entire period of its existence. The present Pope has endorsed them by his approval of the syllabus of Pope Pius IX, and he threw over them the mantle of infallibility. The present Pope at that time was Pope Leo XIII. He was the successor of Pope Pius IX, who wrote the syllabus of the encyclical and syllabus of error of 1864, which damned every tenet of Protestantism and damned every tenet of our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And it's essentially said that the only true religion of Jesus Christ on the earth was the Roman Catholic Church. The power of the Pope was universal over the whole Christian world, and that the government of the United States was heretical. In other words, Protestant. And that it must be overthrown. Not only in America, but over the whole world. And how better to do it than by foisting upon us futurism, and then immediately following that, ecumenism. We're about to see the Constitution, and we are seeing the Constitution of the United States being destroyed. Why? Because it protects Protestants, gives them their right of speech to speak out against and to criticize the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, the Pope of Rome, and to criticize the king, the government of the United States, who carries her wherever she wants to go. Those voices must be silenced. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion must be destroyed as heresy. So said Pope Pius IX and his immediate successor, Pope Leo XIII. So says the government of the United States, post-Vatican Council II. And we have 2 points yet to go in proving that the papacy is the only candidate on the planet for the little horn, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist of the Bible. And we'll get on with it. Point 7, its duration. A certain definite period is assigned to the rule of the little horn. That period is expressed in symbolic language, harmonious with the symbolic or hieroglyphic character of the whole prophecy. It is, quote, time, times, and half a time, or 1,260 days. This is a miniature symbol of the true period, just as the beast is a miniature symbol of the empire, and the little horn of the papacy of Rome. Scripture elsewhere gives us the scale on which it is to be enlarged. Quote, a year for a day, unquote. It means, therefore, not 1,260 literal days, but 1,260 prophetic years. The political supremacy and the persecuting power of the See of Rome were to last for this period and no longer. We've shown you that the popedom dates from the beginning of the 7th century. 12.5 centuries added brings us to the end of the 19th century. In other words, to the days in which we live, the 1880s, when this book was written, and in which Rome has ceased to be governed by its popes and has become the capital of the kings of Italy. Remember, he's making reference here to the overthrow of the papal power in Italy and the installation of an elected kingdom. The people liberated themselves. They rebelled against the papacy and set up their own republic. He says, I have no time to expound this chronological point fully to you this evening. If you wish to study it, you will find it carefully and exactly treated in my recent work entitled Light for the Last Days, unquote. But it leads me to the final point of this identification. Number 8. The doom of the predicted power. What is the end of this symbolic little horn? Quote, they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end, unquote. Quote, the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame, unquote. This last clause of the prophecy is, of course, not yet fully accomplished, as it is the coming of the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven that brings about the final consummation, as confirmed in verse 13. Speculation about the future we leave to futurists, and therefore it might at first sight seem as if we ought to say nothing on this point of the prophecy. But it is not so. This doom consists clearly of two parts. First, the consuming and the destroying to the end, and then the end itself, symbolized by the slaughter of the beast, the committal of his body to the burning flame. And we'll continue with point 8 of this irrefutable proof that the papacy is the little horn of Daniel, the persecutor of the saints, when we return to the broadcast tomorrow. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Come with a piece of paper tomorrow and take notes. This is the truth, and you won't hear it in the churches today.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
American Family News, I'm Steve Pugh.